Before the race, Kurt Busch said his brother's spirit would be riding with him. Then, he went out and nearly won. This is the story of what happened when grief met one of the biggest stages in motorsport. Kurt Busch returned to the racetrack this past weekend, for the first time since burying his younger brother Kyle Busch. What happened next was not supposed to happen. A driver still carrying the weight of losing a sibling climbed into a race car, hit nearly 200 miles an hour, and drove to a podium finish that stunned the racing world. The margin that secured his third-place position was just 0.011 seconds. That is not a typo. That is the kind of number that gets replayed for years. The event was the historic sports car racing NASCAR Classic, presented by the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, held from July 3rd to July 5th, 2026, at the legendary Circuit de la Sarthe near Le Mans, France. This weekend carried significance far beyond one driver's personal story. It marked the first time in nearly 50 years of the series' history that competition moved overseas. 3 separate races made up the event schedule, giving drivers 3 opportunities to test themselves against one of the most demanding circuits on the planet. Kurt Busch entered the weekend driving his #1 Monster Energy Chevrolet Camaro, a former Chip Ganassi racing chassis that he had piloted to victory at Las Vegas Motor Speedway in September 2020. According to a spotter's guide published ahead of the event, Busch made a decision that shifted the entire meaning of his weekend. He switched his car number from number 1 to number 8, the number his brother Kyle Busch made famous throughout his career. This was not a minor detail. It was a deliberate tribute built into the machine itself before a single lap was driven. In the second race of the weekend, Busch delivered the moment that defined the entire event. His onboard camera recorded a top speed of 197 miles per hour. In the closing stretch, he executed a pass that secured third place, outbraking fellow competitor JC France heading into the final chicane. The final gap between them was 0.011 seconds, a margin so thin it barely registers as measurable at racing speeds. JC France carried his own significant storyline into the weekend. He is the grandson of NASCAR founder Bill France Sr., and he won the opening race of the series in a 2014 Chevrolet Camaro, carrying the Garage 56 livery. His victory arrived exactly 50 years after his grandfather brought stock cars to the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1976, creating a full-circle moment that tied the founding family of NASCAR directly to this historic overseas debut. For Kurt Busch, however, the significance of this weekend went beyond history or lineage. This was his first time driving competitively since his younger brother, Kyle Busch, died suddenly on May 21st, 2026, at the age of 41. Kurt Busch had already stepped away from full-time NASCAR Cup Series competition after the 2022 season. That means this race was not simply a comeback within his sport, it was his return to competitive racing altogether, and he chose to make that return on foreign soil on one of the most difficult circuits in the world. To understand the emotional weight riding alongside him, it helps to understand what NASCAR lost when Kyle Busch died. Kyle Busch was not just a champion. He was the winningest driver in NASCAR history across all 3 National Touring Series, with 234 career victories. No driver in the sport's history, including Richard Petty, Dale Earnhardt, or Jeff Gordon, has matched that total. He was also a 2-time NASCAR Cup Series champion, having won titles in 2015 and 2019. Just 6 days before his death, Kyle Busch won a Craftsman Truck Series race at Dover Motor Speedway, marking his 69th Truck Series victory and his 234th career win across all series. He went out on top, still competing at the highest level of his sport, still doing what he had done for nearly his entire life. Before the green flag dropped at Le Mans, Kurt Busch made some of his first public comments since his brother's death. He said, "Kyle's spirit will always ride with me." He added that it was still difficult to process that his brother was gone, and that Kyle Busch would have wanted nothing more than to be racing right there alongside him. Kurt Busch expressed hope that the weekend could become, in his words, a tribute delivered in full Kyle style. To fully understand the scale of what happened on May 21st, it is necessary to examine how quickly everything unfolded. According to the death certificate obtained by multiple news organizations, Kyle Busch had been dealing with bacterial pneumonia for what the certificate described as days to weeks before his death. That pneumonia progressed into sepsis, a life-threatening condition that occurs when the body's response to infection begins damaging its own tissue and organs. The sepsis lasted approximately 1 day, according to the certificate, and it led to disseminated intravascular coagulation, a condition that causes abnormal blood clotting throughout the body's blood vessels. That condition ultimately caused hemorrhagic shock, which results from severe internal or external blood loss. The disseminated intravascular coagulation and hemorrhagic shock together lasted only hours before his death. The timeline leading up to his death shows a driver who continued competing even as his condition worsened. On May 10th, while racing at Watkins Glen International, Kyle Busch radioed his team saying he needed medical attention, stating, "I'm gonna need a shot." Despite this, he continued racing. Following his Truck Series win at Dover on May 15th, he was asked whether he felt better. He responded by motioning to his face and said, "You can kind of hear it. I'm still not great." In the days that followed, he still attended public appearances, including the opening of an indoor karting facility on May 19th and a fan appearance at his race shop on May 20th. That evening, his condition changed rapidly. Around 5:30 in the evening on May 20th, an emergency call was placed from the General Motors Charlotte Technical Center in Concord, North Carolina, where Kyle Busch had been using a racing simulator. The caller described him experiencing shortness of breath, extreme heat, and coughing up blood. He was transported to a hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina, and died the following day, May 21st, 2026. The official manner of death listed on the certificate was natural causes. This timeline underscores a detail that has weighed heavily on the racing community. Kyle Busch was not retired. He was not injured in competition. He was actively racing, winning races, and gone within a single week of his final victory. The bond between the two brothers extended well beyond the racetrack, and their history together provides important context for why this particular race carried such personal meaning. Earlier in 2026, Kurt Busch was inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame, and it was his younger brother, Kyle Busch, who introduced him on stage during the ceremony. During that induction speech, Kyle Busch spoke about their upbringing, describing their family in Las Vegas, Nevada as blue-collar and hard-working, saying that hard work was never optional in their household. He expressed pride in his older brother's perseverance, closing his remarks by saying he was proud to call Kurt Busch his brother. That same closeness was visible in how Kurt Busch chose to honor Kyle Busch immediately after his passing. At the Coca-Cola 600 at Charlotte Motor Speedway, the first NASCAR race held after Kyle Busch's death, Kurt Busch placed 8 white roses on a number 8 logo painted in the infield, 1 rose for each digit representing his brother's iconic car number. Remarkably, all 8 flowers remained intact throughout the entire race. That moment set the tone for what would follow. The switch to the number 8 car at Le Mans and the podium finish that came with it was not an isolated tribute. It was the next chapter in an ongoing pattern of remembrance that began the moment NASCAR returned to competition after Kyle Busch's death. Analysts and longtime fans have offered differing perspectives on what it means for Kurt Busch to return to a race car this quickly after such a personal loss. Motorsport requires complete focus, and grief is widely understood to affect concentration, reaction time, and decision-making, all of which matter significantly at speeds approaching 200 miles an hour. At the same time, For drivers who have spent their entire lives defining themselves through competition, racing can serve as a familiar and structured outlet during a period of profound disruption. Sitting at home without that outlet may have presented its own set of challenges. The choice of location adds another layer to this decision. Historic sports car racing selected this exact weekend to send its NASCAR Classic series overseas for the first time in nearly 50 years of the organization's existence. Kurt Busch could have chosen a smaller, lower-pressure event for his return to competitive racing. Instead, his comeback coincided with the biggest stage the series had ever attempted. The competitive results from the weekend suggest that whatever internal challenges Kurt Busch faced, they did not diminish his on-track performance. A margin of 0.011 seconds for third place indicates that he was not simply present for the tribute. He was actively racing for position against a competitor with his own significant family history in the sport. His instincts, car control, and competitive focus appeared unaffected by the personal weight of the weekend, and by some measures, may have been sharpened by it. Reaction across the racing community following the race has combined genuine admiration with ongoing concern. Many longtime fans have described the podium finish as one of the most emotional storylines of the year, framing it as a tribute delivered by one Hall of Fame caliber driver in honor of another. At the same time, there remains a tension on how Kurt Busch will manage the emotional demands of continued racing throughout the year, since sustaining this level of focus across a longer stretch of competition is different from a single tribute weekend. Following his appearance at Le Mans, Kurt Busch has continued to remain active in racing, including his ongoing involvement with the International Race of Champions presented by Chevrolet, alongside continued participation in vintage and historic racing events. As the anniversary of Kyle Busch's death approaches later this year, additional tributes and retrospective coverage from racing outlets are expected to continue, extending the pattern of remembrance that began at the Coca-Cola 600 and carried through to the number 8 tribute car at Le Mans. The central question surrounding this story remains open. Was returning to competitive racing this soon after burying his brother the right way for Kurt Busch to process his grief? Or does it represent a risk that has yet to be fully tested across a longer stretch of competition? The podium finish at Le Mans answered nothing definitively. It simply showed that, for one weekend, on one of the most demanding circuits in the world, a grieving brother strapped into a race car carrying his sibling's number and drove it as if his instincts had never left him.